In the not-so-distant future, the world had changed. Technology ruled everything. Wars were no longer fought by soldiers on the ground, but by machines in the sky and robots on the battlefield. Drones buzzed overhead, firing precise shots without ever feeling fear or doubt. Artificial intelligence made decisions faster than any human brain could process. It seemed like humanity had moved past the need for flesh-and-blood warriors, but Colonel Daniel Hayes didn't believe it. He was a man who had spent decades in the military, watching the shift from human-led armies to machine-driven ones. While others praised the efficiency of robots and AI, he saw something missing. Machines didn't feel compassion. They couldn't adapt when things went wrong. And they certainly didn't have the spirit that made humans so unpredictable and sometimes unstoppable. Colonel Hayes had an idea. A risky one. He wanted to create a new kind of army. Not a massive force with thousands of soldiers, but a small, tight-knit group of ordinary people. People who could think quickly, work together, and rely on their instincts instead of algorithms. He called it Tiny Army. The name itself sounded ridiculous to most people. How could such a tiny group make a difference in a world dominated by advanced technology? The reaction to his proposal was exactly what he expected: laughter. Politicians laughed at him during meetings, calling his plan outdated and naive. Scientists rolled their eyes, saying humans couldn't compete with machines anymore. Even some of his fellow officers dismissed the idea as a waste of time. But Colonel Hayes didn't care. He knew there was still value in humanity's ability to adapt and persevere. So against all odds, he pushed forward. He started recruiting. Not from elite military schools or special forces units, but from everyday life. He looked for people who had grit, determination, and a willingness to learn. One of the first recruits was Emma Carter, a former teacher who had left her job after losing faith in the system. She had always been good at solving problems and keeping calm under pressure. Her skills might not have been suited for a classroom anymore, but they could be perfect for this new challenge. Next came Ryan Brooks, a mechanic who worked in a garage fixing cars. Ryan wasn't someone you'd expect to see in uniform. He was rough around the edges with grease-stained hands and a quick temper. But he had a knack for figuring out how things worked, and more importantly, how to fix them when they broke. In a world where machines often failed, Ryan's talent would prove invaluable. Lisa Meyer joined the team too. She was a nurse who had seen her fair share of emergencies. Lisa had a steady hand and a compassionate heart. She understood pain and suffering in ways that many others didn't. If anyone could keep the team alive through injuries and hardships, it was her. And then there was Jake Sullivan. Jake wasn't the kind of person most people trusted right away. He had a criminal record and a reputation for trouble. But Colonel Hayes saw something in him, a spark of potential buried beneath years of bad choices. Jake was street-smart, resourceful, and fearless. He might not follow rules perfectly, but he had a knack for getting out of impossible situations. With his team assembled, Colonel Hayes brought them to a remote training facility hidden deep in the wilderness. It was far away from prying eyes and skeptical critics. The recruits arrived with little idea of what to expect. Some were excited, others nervous, and a few downright skeptical. But none of them could deny that they felt a strange sense of purpose being there. Training began immediately. It was brutal. The days started before sunrise and ended long after sunset. Physical conditioning pushed their bodies to the limit. Tactical drills tested their minds. Psychological evaluations probed their emotions. Colonel Hayes didn't sugarcoat anything. He told them straight up that this wouldn't be easy. They weren't superhumans or geniuses. They were just regular people trying to do something extraordinary. At first, the recruits struggled. Emma found herself overwhelmed by the physical demands. She wasn't used to running miles or carrying heavy packs. Ryan clashed with the structured environment. frustrated by the constant orders and strict schedules. Lisa worried that she wouldn't be strong enough to handle the violence and chaos of combat. And Jake, well, Jake questioned whether he even belonged there at all. But slowly, something began to change. As the weeks went by, the recruits started working together. Emma learned to push through her exhaustion, drawing strength from the support of her teammates. Ryan discovered that his mechanical skills weren't just useful for fixing engines. They could also save lives when equipment broke down. Lisa became a pillar of stability, tending to wounds and offering words of encouragement when spirits were low. And Jake surprised everyone, including himself, by stepping up in moments of crisis. His reckless streak turned into boldness, and his street smarts became a valuable asset. Colonel Hayes watched it all unfold with quiet pride. These weren't perfect soldiers by any means. They stumbled, argued, and made mistakes. But they also adapted, supported each other, and kept going no matter what. That was the beauty of humanity. It wasn't about being flawless. It was about finding a way to move forward. As the training progressed, news of Tiny Army leaked to the public. At first, it was met with ridicule. Late-night comedians joked about the little army that couldn't. Social media exploded with memes mocking the concept. Critics pointed out how absurd it was to rely on humans in a world where machines did everything better. But amidst the laughter, there were whispers of curiosity. Some people wondered if maybe, just maybe, Colonel Hayes was onto something. Could a small group of ordinary people really hold their own against the high-tech giants of modern warfare? Or was this whole thing doomed to fail spectacularly? Colonel Hayes ignored the noise. He focused on preparing his team for whatever lay ahead. He knew the real test would come soon enough. Until then, all they could do was train, trust each other, and hope that humanity's greatest strength, its heart, would shine through when it mattered most. By the time the final phase of training approached, the recruits had transformed. They weren't the same individuals who had arrived months earlier. They were stronger, smarter, and more united than ever before. They still had doubts, fears, and flaws, but they also had something else: belief. Belief in themselves, in each other, and in the mission they had chosen to take on. Little did they know, their chance to prove themselves was closer than they thought. Somewhere out there, a conflict was brewing, one that would put Tiny Army to the ultimate test. When that day came, the world would finally see what Colonel Hayes had known all along: that even in a world ruled by machines, humanity still had a fighting chance. The first real test for Tiny Army came sooner than anyone expected. A crisis erupted along the border of two rival nations, sparking tensions that threatened to spiral into full-blown war. The situation had started with a high-tech drone strike gone wrong. What was supposed to be a surgical operation targeting enemy weapons caches ended up hitting a civilian village instead. The fallout was catastrophic. Dozens of innocent lives lost, homes destroyed, and outrage spreading like wildfire across the globe. The international community scrambled to respond, but the usual solutions, sending in more drones or automated units, were out of the question. The region was now a powder keg, and any further use of advanced technology risked escalating the conflict. Diplomats argued fiercely over what to do next. Military leaders hesitated, unsure how to proceed without causing more harm. It was in this moment of uncertainty that Colonel Daniel Hayes received an unexpected call. "We need you," said General Patricia Monroe, her voice tense over the secure line. "Tiny Army is being deployed." Colonel Hayes didn't ask questions. He knew this was their chance to prove themselves or fail spectacularly. Within hours, Emma Carter, Ryan Brooks, Lisa Meyer, and Jake Sullivan were briefed on the mission. They were to infiltrate a hostile compound located near the site of the botched drone strike. Their objectives were clear: gather intelligence about the enemy's movements, assess the damage caused by the earlier attack, and neutralize any remaining threats. Most importantly, They were to avoid detection at all costs. The team boarded a transport plane under the cover of darkness. None of them spoke much during the flight. Each person sat quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Emma gripped the straps of her backpack tightly, rehearsing every detail of the plan in her mind. Ryan fiddled with a small wrench he kept in his pocket, muttering to himself about potential mechanical issues they might face. Lisa checked and rechecked her medical kit, ensuring she had everything she'd need in case someone got hurt. And Jake stared out the window, his jaw clenched as if bracing himself for whatever lay ahead. When they landed, the reality of the situation hit hard. The landscape was barren and desolate, scarred by years of conflict. Crumbling buildings stood like skeletons against the horizon, and the air carried the faint smell of smoke and decay. The team moved cautiously, sticking to shadows as they approached the compound. Colonel Hayes stayed close, guiding them with quiet commands. Their first challenge came almost immediately. At the edge of the compound, they encountered a heavily guarded checkpoint. Armed guards patrolled back and forth, their eyes scanning the area for intruders. Surveillance cameras mounted on poles swiveled constantly, leaving no blind spots. For a moment, it seemed impossible to get through undetected. But Emma had an idea. What if we blend in? She whispered, pulling out scraps of fabric from her pack. She quickly fashioned makeshift disguises using old rags and dirt to mimic the appearance of local villagers. The others followed her lead, smearing mud on their faces and wrapping torn cloth around their heads. It wasn't perfect, but it might just work. With bated breath, they approached the checkpoint. Ryan limped slightly, pretending to be injured, while Lisa supported him with one arm. Emma walked ahead, clutching a bundle of sticks as though gathering firewood. Jake trailed behind, keeping his head down and avoiding eye contact. To their relief, the guards barely glanced at them before waving them through. Once inside the compound, the team split up to cover more ground. Emma and Ryan headed toward the main building, where they hoped to find documents or computer files containing valuable information. Lisa stayed nearby, ready to treat injuries if needed. Jake took position outside, acting as lookout and prepared to create distractions if things went south. Inside the building, Emma and Ryan discovered a room filled with maps, papers, and electronic devices. Emma snapped photos with a handheld camera while Ryan examined the equipment. "This stuff looks old school," he muttered, picking up a dusty radio transmitter. "They're not relying on fancy tech here." "Exactly," Emma replied softly. "That's why we have a chance." Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming. Without hesitation, Ryan grabbed a nearby chair and wedged it against the door handle. Emma crouched low, holding her breath. Outside, Jake sprang into action. He threw a rock at a distant wall, creating enough noise to draw attention away from the building. The footsteps faded as the guards rushed off to investigate. Back outside, Lisa noticed movement near the perimeter fence. A group of armed men appeared, likely alerted by Jake's distraction. Thinking quickly, she signaled to Jake, who darted behind a pile of rubble. Together, they devised a plan. Using spare parts from his toolkit, Ryan rigged a crude explosive device from materials scavenged earlier. When the men passed by, Jake triggered the trap, sending debris flying and scattering the group. Despite these close calls, the team managed to complete their mission. They gathered critical intelligence, confirmed the extent of the damage caused by the drone strike, and disabled several enemy vehicles parked within the compound. As dawn broke, they regrouped at the extraction point, exhausted but triumphant. The journey back wasn't easy. Communication lines remained jammed, forcing them to navigate blindly through hostile territory. At one point, their vehicle, a beat-up truck stolen from the compound, broke down in the middle of nowhere. With time running out and enemy forces closing in, Ryan worked tirelessly to repair the engine. Sweat dripped from his brow as he cursed. Under his breath, but eventually, the truck roared back to life. By the time they reached safety, the team was battered and bruised. Their uniforms were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and grime, but they had done it. Against all odds, Tiny Army had succeeded where machines and larger forces had failed. News of their success spread quickly. Back home, reactions were mixed. Some praised the team's ingenuity and bravery, hailing them as heroes. Others dismissed their accomplishment as luck, arguing that the mission had been too small-scale to truly matter. Critics pointed out the risks involved and questioned whether human-led operations could ever match the precision of automated systems. Even within their own ranks, opinions varied. Emma felt a deep sense of pride, but also guilt over the destruction she had witnessed. Ryan couldn't stop talking about the thrill of fixing broken machinery under pressure, though he admitted the experience had shaken him. Lisa struggled with the emotional toll of treating injuries sustained during the mission, wondering if she was cut out for this kind of work. And Jake wrestled with conflicting emotions, pride in proving his worth versus lingering doubts about whether he truly belonged. Colonel Hayes watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Tiny Army had proven its potential, but skepticism still loomed large. More challenges awaited them, and not everyone would survive. Yet despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear: humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, persevere, and care for one another, had shone through once again. As the team rested and recovered, they couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would they be given another chance to prove themselves? Or would this victory be overshadowed by doubts and fears? Whatever lay ahead, one truth remained: Tiny Army had taken its first step onto the world stage, and nothing would ever be the same again. The success of Tiny Army's first mission brought both attention and pressure. News outlets covered their story, highlighting how a small group of ordinary people had achieved what advanced technology and larger forces could not. Some journalists focused on the ingenuity of the team, while others questioned whether their victory was a fluke. Social media buzzed with debates about the role of humans in modern warfare. Supporters hailed them as heroes, but critics argued that relying on human warriors was outdated and risky. For Emma Carter, Ryan Brooks, Lisa Meyer, and Jake Sullivan, life became a whirlwind. They were no longer just trainees or recruits. They were symbols of something bigger. Interviews, photo shoots, and public appearances filled their days. Colonel Daniel Hayes tried to shield them from the spotlight as much as possible, knowing that fame could be distracting and dangerous. But it was impossible to ignore the growing interest in Tiny Army. Despite the praise, cracks began to form within the team. The stress of constant missions and the weight of expectations took its toll. Emma found herself haunted by the faces of the civilians she had seen during their last operation. She couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't done enough to prevent suffering. Late at night, she would sit alone in her quarters, staring at the photos she had taken during the mission, wondering if there had been another way. Ryan, on the other hand, grew increasingly frustrated. He was proud of his contributions, especially when it came to fixing broken equipment under pressure, but he felt unappreciated. "No one even notices what I do," he muttered to Jake one evening. "They talk about Emma's plans and Lisa's bravery, but without me keeping things running, we'd all be stuck." Lisa struggled with her own demons. Treating injuries in the field was one thing, but dealing with the emotional aftermath was another. She often replayed moments in her mind times when she had patched up wounds only to see someone collapse later from complications. The guilt gnawed at her, making it hard to sleep. She started spending more time alone, reading medical journals and practicing techniques to distract herself. And then there was Jake. His reckless behavior, which had once been an asset, now seemed like a liability. During training exercises, he pushed boundaries too far, taking unnecessary risks that put himself and others in danger. Colonel Hayes pulled him aside one day after a particularly close call. "You're good, Jake," the colonel said firmly. "But you need to remember that this isn't just about you anymore. We're a team." Jake nodded, but deep down, he wasn't sure he believed it. Part of him still thought he didn't belong, that he was just pretending to be someone better than he actually was. The praise from outsiders made him uncomfortable, and the criticism cut deeper than he let on. Amidst these personal struggles, tensions within higher command also began to rise. Rumors circulated that some leaders wanted to disband Tiny Army and replace it with fully autonomous units. Others saw the team as a threat to the status quo, fearing that their success might lead to calls for less reliance on expensive technology. Even General Patricia Monroe, who had supported Colonel Hayes from the start, seemed hesitant to commit further resources to the project. Colonel Hayes fought tirelessly to keep Tiny Army alive. He attended meetings, gave presentations, and lobbied anyone who would listen. He reminded decision-makers that humanity's greatest strength lay not in machines but in the ability to adapt, empathize, and persevere. Yet despite his efforts, the whispers of betrayal grew louder. It seemed like only a matter of time before Tiny Army's funding or existence was called into question. Then came the news that changed everything. A rogue faction led by Victor Lang, a charismatic extremist, had emerged in a remote region. Lang despised the increasing dependence on technology in warfare. He viewed machines as tools of oppression, stripping humanity of its dignity and soul. His followers shared his beliefs, rejecting modern advancements and embracing a return to simpler, more brutal methods of combat. What made Lang particularly dangerous was his rhetoric. He claimed that Tiny Army was a fraud, a symbol of hypocrisy. "They pretend to champion humanity," he declared in a widely broadcast message, "but they are merely puppets of the same system that enslaves us all." Lang's words resonated with many disillusioned individuals, drawing supporters to his cause. When Lang issued a public challenge to Colonel Hayes, daring him to face off against his forces in a live demonstration, the world watched with bated breath. Critics argued that accepting the challenge would be reckless, potentially putting Tiny Army in unnecessary danger. Supporters urged Colonel Hayes to take the opportunity to silence Lang once and for all. Colonel Hayes didn't hesitate. He knew this was a chance to prove Tiny Army's worth, not just to the world, but to themselves. Gathering his team, he explained the situation. "This isn't just about winning or losing," he said. "It's about showing what we stand for. Humanity isn't perfect, but it's resilient. And that's something no machine can replicate." The team listened quietly, each processing the gravity of the moment. Emma clenched her fists, determination replacing doubt. Ryan straightened his posture, ready to prove his value. Lisa took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. And Jake, for the first time in weeks, looked focused. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Preparations began immediately. The location chosen for the confrontation was a sprawling urban wasteland, abandoned years ago due to economic collapse and environmental decay. Buildings stood half-collapsed, streets were littered with debris, and power lines hung uselessly from broken poles. It was a chaotic, unpredictable environment, exactly the kind of place where machines struggled and humans thrived. Tiny Army arrived under the cover of darkness, setting up camp on the outskirts of the city. They studied maps, reviewed strategies, and checked equipment. Colonel Hayes emphasized flexibility over rigid plans, trusting his team to adapt as needed. "We don't know what Lang has planned," he warned, "but we know who we are. Trust yourselves, trust each other, and we'll get through this." As dawn broke, the tension in the air was palpable. Somewhere in the distance, Lang's followers gathered, armed with crude weapons and sheer numbers. Their leader stood atop a crumbling building, watching and waiting. For Tiny Army, the battle ahead would test every ounce of skill, courage, and unity they had built over months of training and missions. Victor. Lang's voice boomed across the ruins through a loudspeaker. Come and show us your so-called humanity, he taunted. Let's see if flesh and blood can stand against willpower and rage. Colonel Hayes turned to his team. Remember why we're here, he said simply. Then, with a nod, they moved forward, stepping into the heart of the challenge. The stage was set for a showdown that would define not only Tiny Army's legacy, but the future of humanity's role in a world dominated by machines. The battle began with an eerie stillness. Tiny Army moved cautiously through the ruins of the urban wasteland, their footsteps muffled by the rubble-strewn streets. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Victor. Lang's followers were somewhere in the distance, their numbers unclear, but their confidence undeniable. Overhead, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Colonel Daniel Hayes led the way, his eyes scanning the environment for any sign of movement. Emma Carter followed close behind, clutching her rifle tightly and glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was sneaking up on them. Ryan Brooks carried a backpack filled with tools and spare parts, ready to improvise solutions at a moment's notice. Lisa Meyer stayed near the center of the group, her medical kit slung across her shoulder, while Jake Sullivan brought up the rear, his sharp gaze darting in every direction. Their first encounter came sooner than expected. A group of Lang's followers emerged from behind a crumbling wall, shouting insults and waving crude weapons pipes, knives, and even farming tools repurposed for combat. They charged without hesitation, driven by raw anger and fervor. It was chaos, but Tiny Army didn't panic. Colonel Hayes signaled for the team to hold their ground. Emma acted quickly. She pointed toward a narrow alleyway between two collapsed buildings. We can funnel them there, she whispered. The team moved into position, using debris to create makeshift barriers that forced their attackers into a tight space. When the enemy entered the alley, Ryan triggered a trap he had set earlier, a tripwire connected to a pile of loose bricks. The bricks tumbled down, pinning several attackers and slowing the rest. Lisa tended to a small cut on Jake's arm, which he had received during the scuffle. You're fine, she said firmly, though her voice betrayed her nerves. Keep moving. Jake nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. As they pressed forward, the team encountered another challenge. Lang's followers had rigged devices to disrupt communication and navigation systems. Their radios crackled with static, rendering them useless. Without clear coordination, they had to rely on hand signals and intuition. Colonel Hayes divided the group into pairs, sending Emma and Ryan one way while he accompanied Lisa and Jake in another direction. Emma and Ryan found themselves in a large open square surrounded by shattered storefronts. Suddenly, a group of enemies appeared from above, dropping onto the street from rooftops. Ryan reacted instantly, grabbing a discarded metal pipe and swinging it like a bat. His movements were swift and precise, taking down two attackers before they could get close. Emma provided cover, firing carefully aimed shots to keep the others at bay. Meanwhile, Colonel Hayes, Lisa, and Jake navigated through a maze of alleys. They stumbled upon a makeshift barricade blocking their path. Behind it, a dozen of Lang's followers waited, armed and ready. Jake grinned despite the danger. Let me handle this, he said, stepping forward before anyone could stop him. He sprinted toward the barricade, zigzagging to avoid incoming projectiles. When he reached it, he vaulted over the top, landing squarely in the middle of the enemy group. His unpredictability caught them off guard, creating enough confusion for Colonel Hayes and Lisa to join the fight. Together, they overwhelmed the defenders, clearing the way forward. Throughout the day, these skirmishes continued. Each victory was hard-earned, each decision fraught with risk. But Tiny Army's adaptability gave them an edge. Where machines might have been paralyzed by uncertainty or unable to navigate the unpredictable terrain, the team thrived. They used the environment to their advantage, turning obstacles into opportunities. Emma coordinated ambushes, Ryan improvised traps, Lisa patched up wounds, and Jake led daring charges that kept their opponents guessing. Despite their successes, the toll of the battle was evident. Everyone was exhausted, their bodies aching from hours of relentless fighting. Lisa's hands trembled as she stitched up a gash on Emma's leg. "We can't keep going like this forever," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the distant shouts of Lang's followers. "We don't have to," Colonel Hayes replied. "Just a little longer." Finally, as dusk approached, the team reached the heart of the city. There, standing atop the remains of a once grand building, was Victor Lang himself. Surrounded by his most loyal supporters, he watched Tiny Army approach with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "So you've made it this far," he called out, his voice echoing across the ruins. "Impressive, but do you really think you can defeat us?" Colonel Hayes stepped forward, raising his hands to show he wasn't armed. "This isn't about defeating anyone," he said calmly. "It's about proving that humanity is stronger than fear and hatred. Your followers believe in you because they see hope in your words. We're not so different, you and I." Lang laughed, a bitter sound that carried no joy. "Hope? You think I'm here to inspire hope? No, Colonel. I'm here to tear down the system that enslaves us all, including you." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, unexpectedly, Colonel Hayes extended his hand. "Help us change it then. Together." The crowd stirred, unsure how to react. Lang stared at the offered hand, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, it seemed like he might refuse or worse, attack. But then, slowly, he lowered his weapon and took a step forward. "Fine," he said gruffly. "But if this is a trick, you'll regret it." With that, the battle ended not with a final blow, but with a handshake. Lang's followers dispersed, their fervor replaced by uncertainty. Tiny Army stood victorious, not because they had crushed their enemies, but because they had shown them a different path. As night fell, the team regrouped, battered but alive. They sat together in the shadow of the ruined city, sharing what little food and water they had left. No one spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. They had faced impossible odds and prevailed not through brute force, but through teamwork, ingenuity, and the resilience of the human spirit. Colonel Hayes looked at each member of his team, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it," he said. "Simply, all of you. This is what humanity is capable of when we work together." Emma smiled faintly, her guilt easing just a little. Ryan leaned back against a broken wall, finally feeling recognized for his efforts. Lisa exhaled deeply, her hand steady for the first time in days. And Jake, for the first time in his life, felt like he truly belonged somewhere. The world would soon learn of Tiny Army's triumph. But for now, the team allowed themselves a rare moment of peace. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew something else. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its machines or weapons. It was in its ability to connect, adapt, and persevere. And that was a lesson worth remembering. The news of Tiny Army's victory spread like wildfire. Within hours, images and videos of the battle flooded social media platforms, news websites, and television broadcasts. People around the world watched in awe as footage captured the team's ingenuity, bravery, and teamwork. The urban wasteland where the confrontation had taken place became a symbol of hope, not because it was beautiful or grand, but because it showed what ordinary people could achieve against overwhelming odds. At first, reactions were mixed. Some praised Tiny Army for their courage and resourcefulness, calling them heroes who reminded humanity of its own potential. Others remained skeptical, dismissing their success as luck or an anomaly. Critics argued that relying on human warriors instead of machines was inefficient and risky. Yet even the skeptics couldn't deny the impact of what they had witnessed. For the first time in years, the conversation shifted. People began to question whether technology truly held all the answers, or if there was still room for humanity. In a world increasingly dominated by machines, for Colonel Daniel Hayes and his team, life after the battle was both chaotic and transformative. Interviews, speeches, and public appearances filled their days. Politicians invited them to testify before committees. Scientists studied their methods, trying to understand how humans had outperformed advanced systems. Military leaders debated whether Tiny Army's approach could be scaled up or replicated. Despite the attention, Colonel Hayes made sure his team stayed grounded. "We're not perfect," he told them repeatedly. "We're just proof that humanity can adapt." Emma Carter found herself at the center of much of the attention. Her quick thinking during the battle, particularly her ability to use the environment to funnel enemies into traps, had earned widespread admiration. Journalists often asked her about leadership and strategy, but Emma preferred to talk about teamwork. "It wasn't just me," she would say, gesturing to her teammates. "We did this together." Still, the spotlight weighed on her. She struggled with imposter syndrome, wondering if she deserved the praise. Late at night, she wrote in a journal, reflecting on everything they had been through and trying to make sense of her emotions. Ryan Brooks, on the other hand, thrived under the recognition. For once, people noticed his contributions and appreciated them. His improvised traps and mechanical fixes had saved the team multiple times, and now everyone knew it. Reporters called him the MacGyver of modern warfare, a nickname that made him grin every time he heard it. But beneath his newfound confidence, Ryan carried a quiet sadness. He missed tinkering in his garage back home, the simplicity of fixing cars without the pressure of life or death stakes. Sometimes, he wondered if he'd ever return to that life, or if Tiny Army had changed him too much. Lisa Meyer handled the fame differently. While she was proud of her role in keeping the team alive, she felt uncomfortable being called a hero. To her, treating injuries was just part of the job, something anyone trained in medicine would have done. What troubled her most was the emotional toll of the mission. She replayed moments in her mind, the blood, the screams, the faces of those she couldn't save, and wondered if she'd ever fully recover. During interviews, she spoke passionately about the importance of mental health support for soldiers and civilians alike, hoping her words might help others struggling silently. Jake Sullivan experienced the biggest transformation. The reckless ex-con who had joined Tiny Army seeking redemption emerged as someone different entirely. Publicly, he embraced his role as a symbol of second chances, telling audiences that everyone deserves an opportunity to prove themselves. Privately, however, he wrestled with self-doubt. Could he really live up to the image people had of him? Was he worthy of the trust his teammates placed in him? These questions lingered, but Jake refused to let them hold him back. Instead, he threw himself into training, determined to become the best version of himself. As weeks turned into months, Tiny Army's influence grew. Governments began re-evaluating their reliance on automation, investing in hybrid approaches that combined human insight with technological prowess. Military academies started teaching courses based on Tiny Army's tactics, emphasizing adaptability, creativity, and teamwork. Museums dedicated exhibits to their achievements, showcasing artifacts from the battle alongside personal stories from the team members. Schools included their journey in history lessons, inspiring students to believe in the power of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt in quieter ways, in the hearts of individuals who saw Tiny Army's story and realized they weren't alone. Letters poured in from fans around the world, thanking the team for restoring faith in humanity's potential. One letter, written by a young girl named Sophie, stood out. You showed us we don't need to be perfect to be heroes, she wrote. We just need to care. Colonel Hayes read the letter aloud during a team meeting, his voice thick with emotion. This is why we do what we do, he said. Not for glory or recognition, but because we can make a difference. Despite the accolades, Tiny Army faced challenges. Critics continued to argue that their methods were unsustainable on a larger scale. Budget cuts loomed, threatening the future of similar projects. And within the team itself, tensions occasionally flared as old insecurities resurfaced. But through it all, they remained united, drawing strength from each other and the shared belief that humanity's greatest weapon was its heart. One evening, several months after the battle, the team gathered at Colonel Hayes' countryside home for a rare moment of downtime. The house was modest but cozy, surrounded by rolling fields and tall trees. They sat around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Emma laughed as Ryan recounted one of his clumsier attempts to rig a trap during training. Lisa teased Jake about his dramatic leap over the barricade, while Jake retorted with a playful jab about her medical magic. Even Colonel Hayes joined in, reminiscing about his early days in the military. For a few hours, they weren't soldiers or symbols, they were just people, enjoying each other's company. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Above them, stars glittered in the clear night sky, reminding them of how vast and unpredictable the world truly was. As the evening drew to a close, Colonel Hayes stood and looked at his team. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. You've shown the world that humanity isn't obsolete. That's something worth fighting for. The words hung in the air, resonating deeply with each of them. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenges would arise, doubts would creep in, and sacrifices would have to be made. But for now, they allowed themselves to feel a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that they had made a difference. Tiny Army's legacy wasn't just in battles won or missions completed. It was in the lives they touched, the conversations they sparked, and the reminder they gave to the world that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to connect, persevere, and care. And that was a lesson worth remembering for today, tomorrow, and generations to come. Years passed, and the world continued to change. Technology advanced at a rapid pace, with machines becoming smarter, faster, and more efficient. Drones flew higher, robots grew stronger, and artificial intelligence reached levels once thought impossible. Yet amidst all this progress, humanity's role in warfare and life itself remained a topic of debate. Tiny Army had sparked something that couldn't be ignored, a renewed appreciation for the qualities that made humans unique. Colonel Daniel Hayes retired not long after the battle against Victor Lang. He moved to a quiet countryside home, far from the noise and politics of military life. Though he stepped away from active duty, his influence lingered. Books were written about his leadership, documentaries explored his philosophy, and young soldiers studied his strategies in training programs around the world. But what brought him the most joy were the letters he received from ordinary people, teachers, mechanics, nurses, and even former criminals who said his story had inspired them to believe in their own potential. Hayes spent his days tending to a small garden, reading books, and occasionally speaking at events when asked. He never sought fame or recognition, but he understood the importance of sharing Tiny Army's message. It's not about us, he would say during speeches. It's about reminding people that humanity is still relevant. Machines can do amazing things, but they'll never replace the heart and soul of what makes us human. Emma Carter also found a new chapter in her life. After leaving Tiny Army, she wrote a memoir detailing their journey from the grueling training sessions to the harrowing battles they faced. The book became an international bestseller, praised for its honesty and insight into the human spirit. Emma used the proceeds to start a foundation aimed at helping veterans transition back to civilian life. She traveled across the country, visiting schools and community centers, encouraging young people to pursue careers in fields like education, healthcare, and engineering. Her message was simple: no matter where you come from or what challenges you face, you have the power to make a difference. Ryan Brooks returned to his garage, but it wasn't the same as before. His experiences with Tiny Army had changed him, giving him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He began teaching workshops on survival skills and mechanical repair, passing on the knowledge he'd gained during missions. Kids from the neighborhood flocked to his classes, eager to learn how to fix bikes, build tools, and solve problems creatively. Ryan loved seeing the spark of curiosity in their eyes. It reminded him of himself when he was younger. On weekends, he volunteered at a local shelter, using his hands to repair broken appliances and furniture. For Ryan, it wasn't just about fixing things. It was about making people's lives a little easier. Lisa Meyer went back to nursing, but her work took on a deeper meaning. She joined a nonprofit organization that provided medical care to underserved communities, traveling to remote areas where access to doctors was limited. Lisa saw firsthand how much her presence meant to those. She helped not just because of her skills, but because of the compassion she showed. She often thought about the lessons she'd learned during her time with Tiny Army, that healing wasn't just about treating wounds, but about offering hope and understanding. In her free time, she mentored aspiring nurses, emphasizing the importance of empathy and resilience in their profession. Jake Sullivan underwent the biggest transformation of all. Once a street-smart ex-con searching for redemption, he now dedicated his life to helping others find theirs. He joined a mentorship program for troubled youth, working closely with kids who reminded him of his younger self. Jake didn't sugarcoat anything. He told them straight up that life wouldn't always be fair, and mistakes would happen. But he also showed them that every day was a chance to start over. Slowly but surely, he earned their trust, becoming a role model they could look up to. When asked about his past, Jake didn't shy away from it. "I'm not proud of everything I've done," he admitted. "But I've learned that it's never too late to change." As the years went by, Tiny Army's legacy lived on in countless ways. Museums featured exhibits showcasing their achievements, complete with artifacts from their missions and personal stories from the team members. Filmmakers adapted their adventures into blockbuster movies, bringing their story to audiences worldwide. Schools included their journey in history lessons, inspiring students to think critically about the balance between technology and humanity. Even politicians referenced Tiny Army in speeches, urging nations to invest in programs that combined human ingenuity with technological innovation. Yet perhaps the most profound impact was felt in quieter, less visible ways. Parents named their children after members of Tiny Army, hoping to instill values of courage, teamwork, and perseverance. Community groups organized events based on their tactics, teaching participants how to solve problems collaboratively. And individuals from factory workers to scientists drew inspiration from their example, realizing that success wasn't about being perfect, but about finding strength in imperfection. One day, Colonel Hayes received a letter that stood out among the rest. It was from Sophie, the young girl who had written to him years earlier. Now grown up, Sophie shared how Tiny Army's story had shaped her life. "Because of you," she wrote, "I decided to become a teacher. Every day, I remind my students that they don't need to be superheroes to make a difference. They just need to care." Hayes smiled as he read the letter, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew Tiny Army's story wasn't just about battles won or missions completed. It was about connection, the bonds formed between teammates, the relationships built with strangers, and the ripple effect of kindness and determination. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its tools or weapons. It was in its ability to adapt, persevere, and care for one another. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Hayes sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields stretched endlessly before him, golden waves swaying gently in the breeze. He thought about Emma, Ryan, Lisa, and Jake, how far they had come and how much they had achieved. They weren't perfect, but they had proven that perfection wasn't necessary. What mattered was the willingness to try, to keep moving forward. Despite fear and uncertainty, the laughter that had greeted Tiny Army in its early days had faded, replaced by respect and admiration. Critics who had once dismissed the idea of human-led armies now acknowledged its value. Skeptics who had doubted humanity's relevance in a tech-driven world found themselves reconsidering their stance. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth remained constant. Humanity's greatest weapon was, and always would be, its heart. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Hayes leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He thought about the battles fought, the lives touched, and the lessons learned. Tiny Army may have been small in size, but its impact was immeasurable. It had reminded the world of something essential, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could shine through. And with that thought, Colonel Hayes smiled. The journey had been long, difficult, and rewarding in ways he could never have imagined. But it wasn't over, not really. As long as there were people willing to care, to adapt, and to persevere, Tiny Army's legacy would live on. Not in museums or movies, but in the hearts of those who believed in the power of humanity to overcome any challenge. Somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped, breaking the silence. Hayes opened his eyes, taking in the beauty of the moment. Life moved forward, carrying with it the echoes of the past and the promise of the future. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace.